A wound should change. It should close, scar, become infected, or eventually heal. But these wounds were reported for decades. Not days, not months, decades. They appeared on the hands and feet of a little-known Italian friar. And soon doctors, church officials, skeptics, and believers all wanted the same answer. What was causing them? Because if they were ordinary wounds, something didn't add up. And if they weren't, the alternative was even harder to explain. The man was Padre Pio, and the wounds would follow him for almost the rest of his life. But before you decide this was a miracle, you need to hear what his critics discovered. San Giovanni Rotondo, southern Italy, September 1918. Padre Pio was a young Capuchin friar. He later described an overwhelming religious experience while praying. Afterward, marks appeared on his body corresponding to the wounds traditionally associated with the crucifixion of Jesus. Hands, feet, and his side, they became known as stigmata. For believers, the meaning seemed obvious, but the church did not simply accept that explanation, because extraordinary wounds demanded investigation. And soon, doctors began examining him. This is where the story becomes much more interesting. Different physicians examined Padre Pio over the years. Descriptions varied. Some observers believed they were dealing with genuine wounds, whose persistence was difficult to explain. Others remained skeptical. The church itself became cautious. Restrictions were eventually placed on Padre Pio's public ministry, while investigations continued. This matters because the story we often hear today skips the uncomfortable part. Padre Pio was not universally believed, even inside the Catholic Church, and then investigators encountered a detail that appeared to offer a completely different explanation. A chemical. Documents later brought renewed attention to reports that Padre Pio had requested substances, including carbolic acid, also known as phenol. Immediately, a theory emerged. Could he have been using chemicals to create or maintain the wounds himself? If true, the mystery would collapse. No miracle, no unexplained medical phenomenon, just deception. But there was a problem. Padre Pio had an explanation for requesting the chemical. It was used for sterilization and medical purposes in the friary, and possession of a chemical is not proof that it created the wounds. So the accusation raises a possibility, but it does not close the case. And now we reach the question that made the controversy survive. Suppose, for a moment, that the wounds were artificially maintained. Then the problem changes. How were they sustained for so long? How were repeated examinations managed? Why didn't prolonged tissue damage produce a simple, obvious medical explanation? And why did descriptions of the wounds change over time? None of those questions automatically proves anything supernatural, but they show why one document or one bottle of chemical cannot settle a story lasting decades. And there was another strange feature. Padre Pio usually kept his hands covered. Bandages became part of his public image, which creates an obvious problem for both sides. Believers saw concealment and suffering. Skeptics saw limited access. The same fact supported two completely different interpretations. For years, the wounds were the center of the controversy. Then Padre Pio grew old. His health weakened. 1968 approached, and according to accounts surrounding his final days, the visible marks began to fade. By the time of his death, on September 23, 1968, the famous wounds were reported to have largely disappeared. Think about that. The phenomenon that had defined him for decades was suddenly no longer there in the same visible form. For believers, even this became part of the mystery. For skeptics, it raised another obvious question. Why would supposedly permanent wounds disappear? And once again, the same evidence produced opposite conclusions. Strip away the devotion. Strip away the accusations. What remains? A real man, a documented religious controversy, wounds repeatedly reported over many years, medical examinations, church investigations, claims of supernatural origin, and alternative explanations that were proposed, but never ended the debate. There is no experiment we can perform today on wounds that no longer exist. No modern laboratory can rewind Padre Pio's body to 1918. So we are left with records, witnesses, medical observations, and competing interpretations, which means the most responsible answer is also the least satisfying. We cannot prove exactly what caused them, but that does not make the mystery weaker. It makes it real. Look again at those bandaged hands. The thumbnail says 50 years, but that number hides the real story. The mystery is not simply that wounds existed for decades. It is that believers and skeptics could look at the same man, the same bandages, the same reports, and see completely different realities. One side saw suffering that medicine could not explain. The other saw a phenomenon that never received the kind of controlled examination modern science would demand. And perhaps that is why Padre Pio still fascinates people who have no interest in saints at all. Because beneath the religious story is a much more universal question. What do we do when evidence is real, but its meaning is not clear? Miracle? Illness? Self-inflicted wounds? Something else? Nearly 60 years after his death, the argument is still open. This is Divine Eternal Stories. We investigate the places where history, evidence, science, and faith collide, without telling you what you must believe. If mysteries like this fascinate you, subscribe, because the next story begins with evidence people thought should settle everything. Instead, it created an even bigger mystery.